Welcome everyone, you're watching TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian. And as you guys have noticed, Cenk is out. He's been out all week, but we have Jessica Burbank filling in today for the first hour. Jessica does great work for us over at Rebel HQ. She also hosts the Power Panel on Fridays quite often. And I'm really happy to be able to do the show with you today, Jessica. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, super happy to be here.
So there's a lot in the news to get to. Yes, we will be talking about the Supreme Court ruling in regard to gun legislation, or gun laws, I should say, in the state of New York, which of course is going to have a ripple effect across the country. We're also going to talk about how our First Amendment rights have now been violated by the courts, and I'll explain why. The BDS movement is a big part of that story. In the second hour, we'll lighten things up. Turns out that J.K. Rowling got into a little bit of trouble, if you want to call it that. She fell prey to a hoax and thought that she was going to interview an incredibly important person, and it didn't end up happening the way she expected. So we'll get to that later in the second hour when Ida Rodriguez will join us. But before we get to all of that, I wanted to start off with the January 6th hearings, which wrapped up not too long ago, at least today's hearings. And there's a lot to get to. A lot of stuff broke that I want to discuss, so let's get right to it.
You also noted that Mr. Rosen said to Mr. Trump, quote, DOJ can't and won't snap its fingers and change the outcome of the election. How did the president respond to that, sir?
He responded very quickly and said, essentially, that's not what I'm asking you to do. What I'm just asking you to do is just say it was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman.
The person you just heard from was the former acting deputy attorney general, Rich Donahue. And he explained how Donald Trump tried to use the DOJ for his own purposes, particularly in overturning the results of the 2020 presidential election. And he continued to do so even after his attorney general, William Barr, quit his post in response to Trump attempting to overturn the results of the election. Now, let's watch what else Donahue had to say during the hearings that took place today.
Let's now put up the notes where you quote the president. As you're speaking to that, he said the president said, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. So, Mr. Donahue, that's a direct quote from President Trump, correct?
That's an exact quote from the president, yes.
So Trump basically tells the DOJ, listen, homeboy, all I need you to do is tell the American people that there's something fishy going on with the elections, it's corrupt, and then all my lapdogs will spring into action, meaning Republican lawmakers, and they'll do the rest on my behalf, essentially dismantling our electoral process, giving a massive middle finger to tens of millions of American voters who cast their ballots for Joe Biden. Just that's all you need to do. Just announce that it's corrupt and my henchmen will do the rest. And luckily, you have top level officials within the Justice Department telling him no. We're unwilling to do that. In fact, there was an Oval Office meeting in which these high-level DOJ officials threatened to quit if Trump carried out one of the actions he was planning to carry out. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But before we do, I think it's also important to note that these hearings are starting to make it more and more clear that the Republican members of Congress who played a role in this bad behavior and essentially undermining the election might be the focus of the hearings and maybe might even face some consequences for it. And I'll explain why in just a moment. But here's one of the moments that really caught my attention. This is after Donahue had made it clear that Trump wanted the DOJ to carry out this kind of messaging to overturn the election. Let's watch.
And so there's widespread evidence of fraud because people haven't done their jobs. Durham and Barr will deserve a big notation in history when it's written of the rise and fall of the United States if they don't clean up this mess, clean up the fraud, do your jobs, and save this little experiment in self-government.
Again, I join my colleagues in calling on Attorney General Barr to immediately let us know what he's doing.
We're already working on challenging the certified electors. And then what about the courts? How pathetic are the courts?
January 6th, I'm joining with the fighters in the Congress, and we are going to object to electors from states that didn't run clean elections. Democracy is left undefended if we accept the result of a stolen election without fighting with every bit of vigor we can muster.
The ultimate date of significance is January 6th. This is how the process works. The ultimate arbiter here, the ultimate check and balance is the United States Congress. And when something is done in an unconstitutional fashion, which happened in several of these states, we have a duty to step forward and have this debate and have this vote on the 6th of January.
So when Trump communicated to top level officials in the DOJ that all they needed to do was announce that there was corruption in the election and that the Republican congressman will do the rest. What you just watched is exactly what Trump was referring to. And to add a little more weight to that argument, it should be noted that several of those Republican lawmakers later asked for pardons. And that was a part of this hearing as well. Those Republican congressmen include Scott Perry, Louis Gohmert, Andy Biggs, Mo Brooks, and Matt Gaetz. Notably, Paul Gosar was not listed there, and neither was Jim Jordan. But why would you ask for pardons unless you engaged in something that can get you into a lot of legal trouble? Jessica, I want to bring you in because I have found these hearings to be persuasive. I kind of went in pretending to be someone who didn't buy what the hearings were supposed to sell us, and I've been kind of surprised at how well they've been carried out. What are your thoughts?
Honestly, yeah, just being able to see the inside of what was going on throughout the days of the insurrection, I think has been huge because for so long we've had people say, we've got to complete an investigation before we come to any conclusions about what happened, or if we see, Donald Trump getting charged for a conspiracy around, an insurrection. And now we're at the point where they've actually done a pretty good job compiling this evidence and presenting it in a way so that it's understandable to the public, right? These aren't just documents that the committee is overlooking themselves. They've really done good work to make, diagrams of everyone who was sitting in that room with Donald Trump, so we can really imagine what happened. And I think it's super interesting that now people are saying, okay, they're not making recommendations to the DOJ about criminally charging Trump. And I think we would all like to see that happen. But let's keep in mind that right now there's a grand jury in Fulton County, Georgia, looking at the evidence that's there to see if Donald Trump should or should not be criminally charged. And that's happening at the same time as these hearings, which I'm pretty hopeful about.
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point about what's taking place in Georgia. I've learned not to be hopeful about anyone in a position of power ever being held accountable in this country, but I also want to be proven wrong. So I hope you're right, I'm wrong. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that I would argue, most powerful component of these hearings is that we're hearing from people who were appointed and obviously supported by Donald Trump during his administration. So during today's hearing, there was testimony from former acting Attorney General Jeff Rosen, former acting Deputy Attorney General Rich Donahue, and then there was also testimony from former Assistant Attorney General Stephen Engel. And really, there was only one member of the DOJ who was willing to do Trump's bidding, and he was essentially someone tasked with environmental issues within the DOJ, who had absolutely no experience, let's say, leading the DOJ. But when these officials refused to carry out what Trump demanded of them, he wanted to essentially replace them, right? Replace the acting attorney general with someone named Jeffrey Clark, who would essentially be another one of his lapdogs. And Jeffrey Clark, based on the evidence we heard today, was very active in assisting Trump in overturning the election. Luckily, he failed. But some of the most shocking names have been named in these hearings in regard to like who stood in the way of Donald Trump. People like William Barr, other Trump appointees within the Justice Department. And it's good to know that that exists. But I think these hearings are also important because it really does set the tone for what could be possible in the future, right? So if there aren't criminal if there isn't criminal prosecution of the individuals involved, that will further embolden other bad actors in the future to just engage in a power grab, because what do they have to lose? It's not like they're gonna face any criminal charges.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's super interesting to think about what would have happened if they took a few extra steps. And it's not interesting in the good way, right? It's kind of a nightmare to imagine that we could have had this authoritarian right-wing leader take hold of power. What if the electors went through and cast their ballots? What if the state legislators did what they were asked to do? What if he did make Jeff Clark the acting attorney general because he said that he would tell the general public, hey, we've got to investigate this, something sketchy happened with this election. Thankfully, there were people who were close to Trump who were saying absolutely not, we cannot do this, because I think the alternative would have been, hey, now we have an actual successful coup in this country. And the way that Democrats in Congress were acting when this was going on, they didn't really have a strong sense of urgency around mobilizing to stop the coup from happening. Thankfully, Mike Pence actually was stepping up and giving some pretty direct and strong orders, as we heard about in this hearing, that, hey, we cannot let this coup happen. We've got to get the military out here. We've got to get everyone out here. But if you think about what could happen in the future, if they were a little bit sneakier, this could have been a coup. And that's really scary. And that's going to embolden the next person that comes to office of the likes of Trump.
And I mean, in some ways, we're already seeing the Republican Party put into motion certain, electoral advantages for themselves, right? Through state voter suppression laws, making it incredibly difficult for people who typically would vote for a Democratic candidate to be able to do so. They're also setting in motion all sorts of conspiracy theories to make people question whether or not the individuals who do participate in our elections can legally do so. White replacement theory, the notion that undocumented immigrants are being brought into the country to participate in our elections, even though they don't have the legal right or ability to do so. The list goes on and on. So while I think it's important to hold those who engaged in this behavior accountable, it's also important to look at what got us to this position, what got the country to this place in the first place, right? Because if we just think that it's about Donald Trump and nothing more, I think we'd be mistaken. There's a lot more to this than one administration full of bad actors.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think if we think about the electorate and what's happening now, is they're being fed a ton of propaganda so that they're ripe for the next demagogue that comes along. But also we're having all of these folks appointed to positions of power who are judges who would probably rule in favor of someone like Trump if they came in office again. So they're really creating ripe conditions to do this again.
Yeah, you make such a great point there. They've taken hold of the judicial system, which we're going to talk about later in the show. It's terrifying, and you need a strong opposition party that actually values democracy and values fighting to do the right thing to kind of counter that, to kind of hinder what we're seeing the Republican Party engage in as we speak. Well, I want to move on to the second component of the hearings that caught my attention, and it focuses mainly on Jeffrey Clark. So let's do it. Today was yet another day of January 6th hearings. Of course, this is the investigation carried out by the House Select Committee investigating the Capitol riots on January 6th. And one of the focuses of today's hearing was on a DOJ lawyer by the name of Jeffrey Clark. And he was essentially an individual within the Justice Department who was considered to replace the acting attorney general because he was one of Trump's henchmen, one of Trump's lapdogs, one of the individuals who was attempting to overturn the election on behalf of Donald Trump. Now, luckily, there was enough pushback from other officials within the Justice Department to prevent that from happening. But I want to start off with this video that shows how Trump met with Jeff Clark through Republican Congressman Scott Perry. In the video, you're going to hear testimony from a DOJ official about what Clark's role was, what he was trying to accomplish, and what the impact would be.
Mr. Donahue, on December 28th, Mr. Clark emailed you and Mr. Rosen a draft letter that he wanted you to sign and send to Georgia state officials. You testified that this could have, quote, grave constitutional consequences. Mr. Donahue, can you tell us what you meant by that?
Well, I had to read both the email and the attached letter twice to make sure I really understood what he was proposing, because it was so extreme to me. I had a hard time getting my head around it initially. So I thought it was very important to give a prompt response rejecting this out of hand. There were, in my response, I explained a number of reasons this is not the department's role to suggest or dictate to state legislatures how they should select their electors. But more importantly, this was not based on fact. This was actually contrary to the facts as developed by department investigations over the last several weeks and months.
Did Mr. Clark continue to push his concept in the coming days?
He did, yes.
That last part's really important, because even after discussing this with former acting attorney general, a deputy attorney general, Rich Donahue, the individual you heard testimony from there, after he was told there is absolutely no weight behind what you're saying here, and under no circumstances will we carry out this alternate slate of electors garbage, he still continued pushing, again, on behalf of Donald Trump, to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. And wouldn't you know it, turns out that the FBI raided Jeffrey Clark's home today. He's outraged about it, but I think there was enough testimony and enough evidence in the hearing today, Jessica, to show that he deserved to have his house raided. He absolutely should be investigated. And I'll give you more details about that raid in just a moment. But first, I want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Every other legal mind that was in the room with Donald Trump when they met for like 2.5 hours, essentially talking about, are we going to replace the attorney general? Not because someone was refusing to investigate this. They had already investigated this and found in the data that there was no evidence of fraud. And so this was Donald Trump asking the DOJ to operate based on his will, not really through any due process. There wasn't anything that was found that they were refusing to pursue or investigate. He just wanted to find someone who would do whatever he wanted them to do. And Jeffrey Clark was like, yeah, I'm your guy. And it kind of makes sense, right? He's an environmental lawyer. A lot of times people who are environmental lawyers do good work, but oftentimes they also do work for oil companies, right? If you imagine what his career was like, he was probably doing whatever was necessary for people with money and power. It's probably how he spent his entire career. And the DOJ raiding his home is huge. This means that there's something in his house that would prove evidence he committed a crime or Donald Trump committed a crime.
So let's talk a little bit about that FBI raid this morning, because first, it's worth noting that he did in fact promote conspiracy theories within the Justice Department, such as that Chinese spies use thermometers to tamper with US voting machines, according to internal emails made public in a Senate Judiciary Committee 2021 report. There's more though. In the days before January 6th, Clark helped Trump devise a plan to oust then acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen. By the way, one of the people who pushed back against Clark and Trump quite aggressively, place himself atop the department. So he would be the head of the DOJ, the acting attorney general, and have the DOJ intervene in Georgia to set aside its voting results in order to sway the state toward Trump, as I mentioned earlier, with the whole sham electors nonsense that they tried out in other swing states where Trump lost. Now, let's get to that notorious January 3rd meeting. So as CNN reports, during this dramatic January 3rd, 2021 Oval Office meeting, Rosen, his then deputy Richard Donahue, and the head of the Office of Legal Counsel, Stephen Engel, all threatened to resign in protest, which ultimately, by the way, convinced Trump not to place Jeffrey Clark as the head of the DOJ, which is kind of shocking. But I guess at that point, Trump was backed into a corner, because it's not just a few high-level DOJ officials who are like, look, if you do this, we're gonna quit. Everyone who was spoken to within the Justice Department said that they would quit. And that would be a bit of a crisis for Donald Trump. He realized he couldn't do it. And at one point, he actually asked Rosen, all right, well, what are you gonna do if are you gonna fire Jeffrey Clark? Because at that point, Jeffrey Clark was his subordinate. And Rosen's like, that's not up to me, that's up to you. And Donald Trump's like, nah, I'm not gonna fire him. So he remained in the DOJ, but keep in mind, there isn't much time left in this administration in the first place.
Yeah, it's crazy to imagine just like being in the room with this group of guys as they're having these conversations. And maybe Trump was swayed by all of them saying, this is an awful idea. You're proposing that if you appoint Jeffrey Clark as acting attorney general, at that point, Donald Trump was like changing attorney generals like he's changing his socks, right? It would have been like 3 within a month, which is insane. You can't do that with public officials. But in any case, they're like, hey, his first act as attorney general, he just stated, would be to be committing a felony. This is criminal behavior. And I think at some point, Donald Trump had to be a little bit scared, right? He's lived a very privileged life. He probably can't even imagine being in a jail or prison cell.
Oh, definitely not. I mean, I think even today he's so entitled and thinks he's so above the law that he would never expect to see the inside of a prison cell. But since you mentioned how it was announced during this meeting that on his first day Clark would commit a felony, I thought that the testimony coming from White House lawyer Eric Hirschman was interesting. So this is what happened with that testimony. So Trump White House lawyer Eric Hirschman said Clark was repeatedly clobbered over the head during the meeting. He said that he explicitly told Clark that he was breaking the law, according to his videotape deposition with the committee. Effing a-hole, congratulations, you just admitted your first step or act you would take as attorney general would be committing a felony, Hirschman said. He's a colorful fellow, to say the least. He likes to use strong language, and I always appreciate anyone who does so. But it's true, and it's important to hear this testimony, not just from Democratic lawmakers, right? Because I think that what they have to say is immediately gonna be discounted by potentially independent voters or obviously Republican voters. To hear from members of Trump's administration, White House lawyers who served under Trump say these things is important, even if it doesn't convince people who are ultra MAGA chuds or whatever it is, that's fine. But you need to have a clear historical record of what really transpired.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have Republicans all over the place saying this is kangaroo court, it's partisan, the Democrats are just doing this. But you have really high level people that were in the administration that were super critical of what Trump was trying to do, which was steal the election. And all of these guys were super mean to Jeffrey Clark, and they had some really funny one-liners where they were like, oh, just go back to your office, we'll call you if there's an oil spill. Because Jeffrey Clark had no experience investigating criminal cases. He had never been on one. So how could you appoint this person to be the attorney general and run the DOJ? You really can't. But this is the position Trump was in, and it was a desperate one where there was no one but this one person who was not that high up in the DOJ, but was in the DOJ that was like, maybe I'll do what you ask me to do. But this was not someone who had an understanding of what was going on or had any experience investigating things like elections.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, that does it for our coverage of the hearing today. We're gonna take a brief break, and when we come back, we've got a lot more news to get to, including what a federal appeals court has decided in regard to our First Amendment rights. And later, we'll of course talk about the Supreme Court's ruling on gun laws in New York, which will have an effect wherever you live. So let's take that break, and we'll be right back with that and more. What's up, everyone? Welcome to our first social break of the day. I'm gonna start off with our members. Eclectic Miscellanea says, Anna's talking about the president of the United States trying to end democracy, and yet my mind is thinking about how wonderful and spotless Anna's kitchen looks. I legit have OCD. Like, I don't just say it, I don't, I'm not flippant about mental health issues. No, it's diagnosed, it's not good. So whenever things feel out of control, I scrub the hell out of my home. Which I did. I painted an entire room, including the ceiling, on the day that the Roe v. Wade, reversal leak happened. So I guess it's good for Christian, maybe not so great for me. But anyway, thank you for that. Salty Mama says, I think we have known about Jeffrey Clark for over a year now. Why the FBI raid only this morning? Has the DOJ been dragging their feet? Salty Mama, you ask a great question. There were some things revealed in the hearing today, particularly, it doesn't have to do with Jeffrey Clark. Yeah, you make a good point. I don't really have a good response to that or good explanation. I don't know why they decided to do the raid today. Could it be for dramatic effect, considering this was a topic of discussion during the hearings? Possibly. Albelzo says, I don't expect Trump to end up in jail. What I'd like to see, though, is everyone else who supported and helped push election lies go to jail. You're talking about members of Congress, I'm guessing. This would make anyone else think twice before supporting a corrupt president in the future. Well, you make a really good point there, because think about how our government is structured and how the founders envisioned our government to work. Like, you're supposed to have 3 branches of government to balance each other out. And when you have members of Congress carrying out the bidding of the executive branch, it shows how that whole system is eroding, right? So I think you make a really good point there. We'll see if there are any consequences. And to be sure, there have been members of Congress in the past who have broken laws and have been prosecuted criminally for it. Some people have even gone to jail as a result. So I think it's more likely that that would happen than the former president being jailed, but we'll see. The Squirrel Nut Mafia says, here's a thought to give Anna nightmares. Great, because my job doesn't give me enough. The only thing stopping the Republicans from an illegal takeover is a small group of Republicans. True, but look, I long for the day when the only reason why I disliked Republicans was because their political opinions were terrible, but they were still decent people in that they wanted to protect our rights, protect our Constitution. They believed, in the rule of law, like all of that stuff, right? I want that, because it's one thing to disagree based on your ideology. It's another thing to deal with a group of people who literally want to crush you and take democracy away from you. Like, that's what we're dealing with when it comes to this new era of Trump Republicans. All right, we've got only 10 seconds left, so unfortunately we got to go back to the show, or maybe fortunate. So let's do that, and I'll see you there. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Anna Kasparian and Jessica Burbank with you. Jessica does content for us over at Rebel HQ. Jessica, where else can the audience find your work?
Yeah, well, we're on the Power Panel every other Friday now, but also I'm on TikTok a lot when I'm not banned. And so you can go over to TikTok.
Dude, I love TikTok, but I've noticed certain things get censored as like sensitive content when it's really not sensitive content. Like, I feel like TikTok's a little more sensitive, to say the least. But you got a bunch of like teenagers on it, so I guess that might be a good thing. I don't know. But why did you get banned?
Yeah, there's never a good explanation. So that's the thing, is they'll just sort of take a video down or say it violates community guidelines. A lot of my stuff about CIA intervention gets taken down, which is pretty suspicious. But I think there's also like a bunch of incels that just mass report and it gets content flagged, and TikTok just responds by taking it down.
Totally. My favorite, you know what, let's talk about this later if we have time, but it's amazing what these guys will do just to make themselves feel better about how sad they are. But anyway, Let's move on. We've got a lot more news to get to. Actually, I wanted to read one more super chat real quick. This is from Rodney Fong, who says, have presidential candidates be fully vetted by security clearance checks, mental health checks, by the Electoral College. include testing with pertinent subject exams, leadership, management, history, political science, sociology, psychology. All right, like I mostly agree with you. I think we need to do far more vetting. And look, this is where I think the press fails us, because the vetting is supposed to happen in real time before the American people during these debates, during the reporting about the presidential candidates. But I mean, we've all seen what presidential debates look like. And some of those questions are ridiculous. A lot of subjects and topics get completely ignored. So I hear you. I also don't want to go crazy and expect, every president to be an expert in psychology and stuff like that, because that would actually limit the pool of people who I think would be qualified, but just might not have that specific expertise. That's why they've got advisors and stuff. All right, well, let's move on to how free speech is actually under threat. And I'm not talking about people getting kicked off of Twitter, specifically talking about the government punishing you for your political speech. Lawmakers in Arkansas passed a law requiring that state contractors not pledge to boycott Israel. So this is the BDS movement, which is of course controversial, considering the United States government and its unyielding support for Israel. But states started passing certain laws that would punish individuals or companies if they signed on to the BDS movement. So in response to that, Arkansas decided, look, if you're getting any type of government contract, government money, state government particularly, and you are possibly pledging to boycott Israel, we're not cool with that. So we're gonna need you to sign a document indicating that you pledge not to boycott Israel. Now that ended up being controversial for a number of different reasons, because we're literally talking about the government punishing you for your speech, which seems to be a pretty clear violation of our First Amendment rights, regardless of how you feel about the BDS movement. And so this ended up making its way through the courts, and the big news today is the 8th Circuit US Court of Appeals has reversed a 2-1 decision last year by a 3-judge panel of the court that found the requirement to be unconstitutional. So let's pause for a second. That means they reversed the ruling indicating that the Arkansas law was unconstitutional. So now they're upholding that law, which means that the state of Arkansas can punish you by refusing to give you government contracts or any government money if you are practicing your political speech in being part of the boycott movement or the BDS movement. So here's more on why this case made it to the 8th Circuit US Court of Appeals. It actually started with the Arkansas Times, a paper in the state that ended up being asked to sign that pledge, and they refused to do so.
Yeah, it's interesting.
The Times is Arkansas's left-leaning magazine. It's free. The publication survives on ad revenue. But this revenue stream is being threatened by a 2017 law that says state contractors have to sign a loyalty pledge to Israel.
Could you explain to me from the beginning how that happened?
One of our biggest advertisers and oldest advertisers is University of Arkansas, Pulaski Technical College. And so in November, the marketing people who we've worked with for years said, the purchasing director is requiring us to get you to sign this. And at first I just sort of lost it. And but this time it just kept coming. And finally I said, well, there's not going to be a signed pledge. See if I can find her. And then
the college buys ads in his paper with state money, making Leverett a state contractor.
You refused to sign it?
Yeah.
And what did that cost you?
Well, so far about $15,000.
$15,000, which might not seem like a lot of money for any type of organization, including a newspaper, except this makes up about 10% of their revenue. They receive 10% of their revenue through the state. And again, it's through various organizations who buy ads on the paper, that appear on the paper, and they use state money in order to purchase those ads. So in this case, it was a university that typically would do advertising in this paper. So I wanna be clear that the paper does not support the BDS movement, but they also don't support the government punishing Americans for whatever political speech or any speech they engage in. They found that to be constitutional, which is why they took this to the courts. Now, as I mentioned, the appeals court has reversed a lower court decision which upholds this Arkansas law. The ACLU has noted that they will take this all the way to the Supreme Court, where unfortunately I'm not hopeful considering the, ideological activism that we've been seeing so far from these conservative justices. Jessica, I wanted to get your thoughts on this.
It really feels like it's a deliberate decision to limit free speech when it comes to criticism of Israel specifically in our country. I wonder, would they have had the same ruling if this was about blocking people who want to boycott corporations in China? And I kind of feel like we wouldn't have seen this happen. And it's really weird to me to see like Arkansas and Israel in the same headline and have the Attorney General of Arkansas saying things like Israel's been an ally of ours. It's kind of like, you guys know each other? Like, why are you making decisions about this? And it's even weirder when you look at the appeals court's ruling, when they're saying, that this actually isn't an expression of, speech or political speech. This has to do with commercial activity, which, is under the purview of the states. And we're really states' rightsing our rights away. And to juxtapose this with, I think, Citizens United is super interesting, where they're saying that, hey, political spending from corporations and other groups is free speech. It's like, are you serious? We essentially have a political industrial complex where there's an industry around elections. This is not free speech. Is that commercial activity now too? Is this going to set a precedent that allows us to overturn Citizens United on this same rationale? It's insane to me that these two rulings can exist in the same justice system.
Well, what I'm actually very curious about is what happens if there is some lefty organization. I mean, I don't even know if this exists, but let's say a very well-to-do lefty organization that has some money to burn, and they decide to spend, who knows, an insane amount of money supporting an organization that helps to support the BDS movement, right? So can the state then punish that corporation? And if it does punish that corporation, how does the corporation only have, personhood and speech rights when it comes to corrupting a politician on pretty much every issue you could imagine? But it doesn't apply to this very specific issue. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. So I'm curious to see how the Supreme Court, figures that out or squares that circle, whatever. We'll see how that plays out. But you mentioned some of the support, like what you've been hearing from individuals who have supported this Arkansas law. And I actually want to go to the next video because it features one of the state lawmakers who sponsored this legislation. And I think it's important to hear what his reasoning is. Let's watch.
It's hard to trace the origin of these anti-BDS laws, but they seem to be the result of coordination between lobby groups, some lawyers, and pro-Israel legislators like Bart Hester, State Senate Majority Leader, lifelong Republican, and dedicated Christian. He sponsored the Arkansas bill.
There are other states that have sponsored bills like this, and they're strikingly similar, almost word for word, like Texas, Louisiana, and I'm wondering basically who's behind authoring these bills.
No one came and pursued me to author this bill, but whenever you decide you're gonna do it, you start researching what other states are doing, if it's working. You always, I like to check with groups like AIPAC, see what their thoughts are, and if they've got any, what we call template legislation that seems to be working for them.
Yeah, that's sure, that's what happened, right? That he, out of nowhere, as a right-wing Christian in Arkansas, decided, hey, I'm curious about this BDS movement thing. Let me go talk to AIPAC. Let me go out of my way to talk to AIPAC. I'm researching this issue. No, AIPAC came to you. I mean, as they do, they engage in lobbying of lawmakers, both on a state and federal level. And that lobbying comes with, campaign donations, of course. That's how lobbying is done in this country. And the fact that they're so effective in convincing state lawmakers and now the federal courts that it's unacceptable to practice your political speech if it hurts the feelings of a foreign government that this country is incredibly supportive of. It's insane. The whole situation is insane.
Absolutely, absolutely insane. I mean, AIPAC is here exercising their First Amendment right of free speech with their money in politics, lobbying members of Congress at a local level, which is just, it's such an absurd situation. But you can't if you want to boycott Israel. And you're right that it actually doesn't really matter if you wanna think about this on a deeper level. It doesn't really matter if you support the BDS movement to see that this is a really dangerous precedent. But it's not really new for things like this to be happening in the United States. Like when South Africa was under an apartheid regime, the United States was supporting the government that was in power at the time for a very long time, when we had a ton of civil rights groups, calling for divestment from South Africa, and the regime there and the United Nations had condemned what was going on. And it took a really long time before our government came around and actually supported ending apartheid in South Africa. And we're kind of on a similar trajectory, I would say, with what's happening in Israel, where there are a lot of groups in the United States that are paying attention to what's happening there, and they want to speak up. And if you think back to what was going on in South Africa, and you think that of course you would condemn it, maybe you wouldn't if you think about where you are at with what's going on in Israel. And I think it's interesting to look at the parallels with that political movement, what was going on at the time, and when the United States eventually came around. And it's really gonna take getting money out of politics to have more people understand what's happening with the apartheid in Palestine by Israel.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Just two more things I want to mention, and then we'll wrap this up. Let's go to graphic 2 here, because Judge Jonathan Kobes, who's with the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, explained his reasoning here for upholding that Arkansas law. The law only prohibits economic decisions that discriminate against Israel because those commercial decisions are invisible to observers unless explained. They are not inherently expressive and do not implicate the First Amendment, which I think is a ridiculous line of thinking. It's ridiculous rationale for this, decision to uphold the law. And I want to just go to what the First Amendment specifically says. What is the wording in the First Amendment? You need to know what it says in order to really evaluate that line of thinking from that Circuit Court of Appeals judge. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. I don't know about you, Jessica, but I've read that over and over again to see if there are any exceptions, particularly exceptions pertaining to whether or not your speech is public enough. Apparently our free speech isn't really free unless we're shouting it from the rooftops. It's insane.
Yeah, the way they've been writing these bills, I think about the Don't Say Gay bill as well, where it's just vague enough that it can apply in every scenario. You can argue that this law applies in every scenario. And we've even seen that start in Florida, where they say, you can't talk about, LGBTQ issues in grades, K through 3rd grade or whatever it was, or other ages where it's deemed inappropriate. Who's to say what's inappropriate? That should be in the law. It should be very specific. Instead, it's subjective, so they can apply this law at will.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're not done with the courts. We're gonna go to this country's highest court and talk about the impact they're having on our already laxed gun legislation in this country. We'll be right back. What's up, everyone? Back to our social break. The Rower writes in and says, "Loved the show yesterday, Anna. Thank you for name dropping the work of Richard Wolff. Would love to see him on the show sometime. Keep singing my song of economic injustice, you wonderful and brilliant siren of salt." So Richard Wolff is fantastic, and he's actually been on the show before. I know Cenk had interviewed him a long time ago. I interviewed him more recently, but we'll invite him back on. I think he's great. Crouching Normie, Hidden Dragon says, "If Merrick Garland doesn't prosecute Trump, then he might as well be Jeffrey Clark." Strong words, but I hear you. I mean, the frustration I feel toward Merrick Garland and how slow he is in doing anything that's substantive it's hard to explain. Keeps me up at night. John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt says, "Every last one of those crooks should be in prison, from Giuliani, Trump, all the way down to the MyPillow psychopath. Sadly, no accountability." You know, the MyPillow guy, whose name I'm forgetting for some reason. What was it again? You guys remember?
I don't remember. I always call him my pillow guy.
Why am I forgetting? Okay, anyway.
Mike Lindell.
Mike Lindell, there we go, that guy. He might, I mean, who knows? Normal people, even like someone who owns a business, could face harsher consequences. Certainly the people who were there on January 6th rioting in the Capitol are facing prison time or have already been convicted and sentenced to prison time. So certain people, I think, are suffering the consequences. It's just that the fish rots from the head down. So you got to get the head, and that's Donald Trump. All right, R. Stone says, "If true justice is accomplished where congressmen and senators are expelled, it is up to the individual states' governors to appoint, or is it up to the states' governors to appoint replacements?" I think it depends on the state. So I know that in California, for instance, if there's a recall election, then it's up to the governor to appoint the replacement. Or if it's like a municipal position, it's up to the mayor to replace the individual. Really depends on the state. All right, some love for our Twitch community. Texidian says, "Is it just me, or does Steve Engels sound an awful heck of a lot like Ben Shapiro when he speaks? He obviously doesn't seem like as garbage a person as Shapiro, but if you close your eyes when he talks, that's pretty funny." Level 18 White Girl says, I've said once, and I've said it 100 times, but the January 6th committee is pointless if they don't do anything. I agree with you on that. It's not pointless. Like I've said, it is important to have a clear historical record of what actually happened, especially in this era of constant disinformation being spouted by the press on the right wing. So I think that there is a point in that regard. But yeah, I would like to see some actual consequences for the people who did this. Punk on a Bike says, "Anna has a nice kitchen." Thank you, I really appreciate that. All right, we are almost out of time, but I'll read one more comment. Next TYT reporter says, "Is this the freedom they're always talking about? Does anyone feel free now? This is as ridiculous as the story on Indisputable about a girl getting a ticket for being underdressed." I totally agree. All right, let's get back to the show. Welcome back to the show. Anna Kasparian and Jessica Burbank with you. It's been a heavy show, and it's about to get even more heavy with an update on a Supreme Court ruling pertaining to gun laws. So let's do it. Let's have a discussion. The right-wing Supreme Court has decided to strike down New York's nearly 100-year-old gun law that would essentially make it very difficult for anyone to engage in concealed carry in public spaces. Now, this is a law that's been around actually more than 100 years. And the idea is, hey, let's limit the number of guns in public spaces and keep people safe. But the Supreme Court has ruled that that's a violation of the Second Amendment because, of course, when you have right-wing ideologues taking hold of the Supreme Court, they're going to carry out right-wing ideology. They're going to be right-wing activists, and that is what we are seeing today. So let's get to the details on this. The court, first, let's just talk about the impact of this. It's the widest expansion of gun rights in America over the last decade. So when was the last time we saw this kind of expansion? Well, the court in 2008 recognized for the first time an individual's right to keep guns at home for self-defense in a case from the District of Columbia, and also in 2010 applied that right to the states. Now, the ruling was, of course, divided. Today's ruling was among the conservative justices in the majority and the liberal justices in the minority. The 6-3 ruling, with the court's conservative justices in the majority and liberal justices in dissent, struck down New York State's limits on carrying concealed handguns outside the home. The court found that the law, enacted in 1913, violated a person's right to keep and bear arms under the US Constitution's Second Amendment. Now, Justice Clarence Thomas wrote the majority opinion in this case, and this is what he argued. He argued, quote, "We know of no other constitutional right that an individual may exercise only after demonstrating to government officers some special need. The New York restriction is unconstitutional because it prevents law-abiding citizens with ordinary self-defense needs from exercising their right to keep and bear arms." And what he's referring to there is how the law in New York was written. So there are some exceptions to the law, but the only exception is if you can persuade the state government that you need to engage in concealed carry because there is a very specific threat that you need to defend yourself against. And so that burden, that standard is a very high standard. It's intentionally high because they wanted to limit the number of guns in public spaces. But at this point, what has become increasingly clear to me, Jessica, is it doesn't matter what law you pass to limit guns, what law you pass to protect citizens from things like mass shootings. When you have ideologues serving on the Supreme Court who will carry out exactly what they were put there to carry out, right? Policies that would broaden or widen the rights of the right wing while screwing over everyone else. So they're gonna do it. And that's exactly what they've been doing on a number of different cases.
Yeah, that's exactly what's going on here. As someone who, uses guns, this law makes perfect sense. I mean, you need to have a gun if you're under violent threat. The only reason I've ever wanted to learn to use guns, handguns for public safety, is because there are crazy people who love to have guns who are extremely violent, and I've come under violent threat. This is more about self-defense than it is about, the Second Amendment. People are much safer if everyday people can't go in the street with guns. The Second Amendment is about the right to bear arms, to have a well-regulated militia. Bro, the militia's not meeting in the Wegmans. Like, you don't need your gun every day in public. And so it's absolutely absurd what Republicans are doing. And if you think about, the due process, right? Someone in law enforcement would have to determine, yes, you're under a certain threat, you're allowed to have a gun to protect yourself in public. The due process they have to go through to determine that is not so different from the kind of due process that was happening under stop and frisk, where law enforcement had to make a determination, is there a crime being committed here? Republicans did not care about that. They did not care that law enforcement could apply that law at their discretion and racially profile people and stop them on the street. But they care about this because it's about their power. It's about their right to have guns. And it's really unfortunate that now they have a majority in the Supreme Court, and this ridiculous hypocritical logic is now becoming law in the United States.
That's right, because if they're striking down this law in New York, that will have a ripple effect, and other states that have similar laws, and there are as many as 6, including California, by the way, will now essentially will not be able to continue implementing that law. Now, the commissioner for the New York Police Department says, everyone hold your horses, nothing is going to change immediately. In fact, let's go to the last graphic here where she says, if you have a premise permit, it does not automatically convert to a carry permit. If you carry a gun illegally in New York City, you will be arrested. And so I think it's really up to the coming days to figure out how these changes will be made. But one other thing I wanted to note is that while, you have these justices make the argument that no, I mean, these standards are too high. People shouldn't have to meet these special standards in order to carry a gun in public spaces. they did acknowledge something very specific in their decision. The ruling acknowledged that the states can prohibit guns in sensitive places. Sensitive places, and that such prohibitions can likely go beyond what is historically considered a sensitive place, such as, oh wow, what a shocker, courthouses and legislative buildings. But why? Why? I'm not allowed, I'm allowed to practice my First Amendment rights in a courthouse, right? Or in a legislative building, right? Why should it be any different when it comes to the Second Amendment, as the Supreme Court sees as, with almost no restrictions? It's amazing because it's like, look, we want to protect Second Amendment rights, even though it's very likely to harm people. But we want to make sure we protect ourselves and insulate ourselves from that harm. That's what I got from that acknowledgement from Supreme Court justices.
Yeah, it feels very much like we are the ruling class. We're gonna, you can have your rights, but you can do it over there. Just keep voting for the people that are giving tax breaks to corporations that we get, dividends from, and we'll be great. That's really the vibe we get from this kind of a sentiment.
And by the way, that's the other part of this, and I'm glad you mentioned corporations, because while this conservative Supreme Court is certainly conservative on social issues, one of the main reasons why the conservative justices were nominated and confirmed is because their number one priority is upholding and protecting the interests of corporations. And in this case, we're talking about gun manufacturers, which of course were represented by the NRA in this case that made it all the way to the Supreme Court. NRA is overjoyed, I'm sure, because they, think that this is just a great expansion of their gun rights, but also because they're delivering for the very people who are paying them to do the lobbying they engage in, the weapons manufacturers. So it's a great day for corporations, a great day for all the individuals who worked really, really hard over the last several decades to install these justices who would implement socially conservative policies, or protect them at least, while simultaneously looking out for the best interests of corporations over the best interests of the American people. All right, well, we're out of time, unfortunately, but I do want to take a quick break. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us. Check out Jessica on Rebel HQ and regularly on our Friday Power Panels. And yeah, we're gonna take a quick break and we'll be right back.
You're about to watch some behind the scenes footage of the Young Turks. Ooh. Now, these are partial videos. If you want to get all of them, you become a member, go to tyt.com/join, and you'll get all the behind the scenes of me, Anna, John, JR, a little bit reality show like. tyt.com/join and enjoy this.
You know what you're seeing behind me? Jersey, hold. Watch me flip this camera. However I flip it. Do I flip it like this? No, I just took a picture. I'm bitsing right now.
What?
Behind the scenes.
Oh, okay. For members? I don't have my face on.
She doesn't have her face on, folks. Oh, that's JR's ass right there.
You can't take 5 minutes off, can you?
No, I can't, Johnny Pie. I said it was live stream, but I was lying. It's not a live stream. It's just for members. Bitsy, this is my cat. You know what his name is? Kiki Cat.
Animals are innocent.
Control room and the insanity is obviously there.
Right now, as you can see, I'm directing or tech directing.
I'm so happy to be here.
This is what like a Labor Day beard looks like for Jank. Man, you're a Young Turks viewer if you recognize me like this.
Oh, thank you. You are the one person in my life I would love to meet.
What's going on, guys? This is a Bitsy or a BTS or behind the scenes with Hassan Piker, AKA Woke Bay.
Oh, hi, I didn't see you there.
I have finished my show, The Damage Report, and now I get into a really awkward time of the day.
When I'm sitting, the control room is right there. So I can see Bart.
This is the Pittsburgh office, by the way. Referred to often as the boiler room.
You see how it's ripped? Is it super unprofessional to wear that at a business meeting? Or am I like cool rebel?
I just finished doing the power panel and I'm fired up.
What do you do for TYT? Not a whole lot.
If you're frantically tweeting at us that something's broken, thank you, because I'm fixing it.
And thank you for being a TYT member.
Super last thing, because there's always got to be a super last thing. Oh, that was disastrous. This has been behind the scenes, behind the scenes.
Welcome to Indisputable. I'm your host, Dr. Rashad Richard. We got a lot happening today. But what do we do on this show? We tell the truth. You know why we tell the truth? Because the truth is simply indisputable.
Rashad, great to be here. Congratulations on the new show. And I gotta let everybody know that Rashad and I go way back.
Here's the pattern that we see in all of these Karen stories. They think they own stuff they do not own. Now, where does that come from? I don't know, maybe slavery. Maybe they think they should still own black people.
This is what happens when Karens weaponize the police.
When you're used to privilege, equality seems like oppression.
It hits you in a certain way when someone is holding you against your will, treating you like you're a criminal and you're an innocent person. This is something that black people face no matter where they are.
A stronger black economy lends itself to a stronger, greater economy. Don't think it's exclusive of you, it's inclusive of you.
What's your beef with critical race theory?
It adds more fuel to the fire of the racist tendencies that we already have.
We have a generation of problem solvers that can remedy the problem if they are properly taught what the problem is.
You know who created redlining in this country? It was the white liberal.
I don't give a damn who created it. If it's a racist policy, Shelley, here's what I don't know. I don't know. See, there you go filibustering, brother. You're scared of this truth, but you're gonna get it, though.
Climate is changing fundamentally, extremely, and non-linearly. It's becoming worse now. It's not when the levees burst that is the problem. It's in the anticipation of that.
So I hope every human being is safe. And by human beings, I do not include multinational corporations, especially the ones that started climate change in the first place.
What we're currently doing right now in cutting emissions is clearly not enough. There will be ramifications to what Trump is doing. I don't want people to suffer, but I feel like there's gonna be a lot of suffering because we have an imbecile as our leader. Welcome back to TYT. Anna Kasparian and Ida Rodriguez with you. Ida, it's been a while since we've done the show together. It's so good to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
You know, you've been busy today. I see how John Idarola is monopolizing your time with Damage Report. But you're always great to have on, so I'm sure the show was great. And I'm happy that you're on with me now, because we're about to dunk on Dave Rubin, one of my favorite hobbies, considering how stupid he is. So why don't we get started with that? Let's do it.
Let's go.
Why wouldn't you, if you have a young boy who wants to be a girl, maybe give him more testosterone so he could maybe feel like more of a man? Wouldn't that possibly make more sense? I'm not even saying it does. I honestly don't understand the full science of all of this.
He doesn't understand the full science of that, much like his failure to understand most things in life. That was Dave Rubin suggesting that minors be forced to take hormones to essentially prevent them from being transgender. That is what Dave Rubin suggested there in the video that you just watched. Notably, he is a member of the LGBTQ community. He is a gay man who's about to have 2 children through surrogates with his husband, and he was attacked viciously by his right-wing audience for wanting to do so. And I think that, chickens come home to roost, and I felt pretty terrible that he was being treated that way because I still have a heart. But this is a guy who literally, in that video you just watched, thought maybe it's a good idea to force minors to take certain hormones that will possibly, according to him, help them identify with what their gender was at birth, what their sex was at birth. Ida.
Well, there is always this thing that sticks in my head from some of my friends who are part of the LGBTQ family, is that there is also, a hierarchy of within that, with where gay white men are at the top of that, and they oppress, other people, and like trans people who are constantly being targeted. A couple of things that I want to say. First and foremost, he said he doesn't understand the science of it all, so then he should shut the hell up about the science of it all. Why are you talking about the science of it all if you just said you don't understand the science of it all? I watched Bill Burr recently at a show that he did for Netflix, and his evolution has been amazing. And he was talking about these people who are always saying that they talking as if they're doctors or scientists, and he really went in on them because he was like, "You're not a doctor, and we should respect doctors." But what pains me to hear sometimes when we talk about trans children is when he said a girl that wants to be a boy or a boy that wants to be a girl, not understanding what it is that is what these people are experiencing. It is not just a desire, just something that you want to do for fun. To have to experience the social, consequences for this, you not to be able to use the proper terminology to give these people the respect that they deserve in terms of what they go through and what they're feeling, regardless of how you feel about it. But I just think, look, trans people have been around, gay people have been around since the beginning of time, Black people have been around, brown people have been around. Y'all just used to oppressing them, and now that they're fighting back and finally giving themselves a voice and advocating for themselves, and other people are gathering around them to support them, you're having your standoff, because it's not like trans people just got here. You know what I mean? It's just this whole revolution of the trans experience and them saying, "Hey, I just want to live. I just want to get a job. Please don't beat me up. Don't kill me." It has become this, oh, they have a voice. They're controlling everybody. Why don't these people attack the people that are really at the top? Why don't you go for them? Because you know that
they're getting paid. They're getting paid from the people at the top. Let's keep it real. And the previous puppets for the powerful right wingers in this country were making similar videos, by the way, except back then they were advocating for electroshock therapy for gay people, like Dave Rubin, essentially torturing members of the gay community to turn them straight. And this is a man who's out there doing the bidding of similar people today. And I mean, it's amazing to me, because again, this is a guy who I think he fully acknowledges, he has to know. I mean, he's attacked by his own community on a regular basis because of who he is as a person. So he knows what the right wing represents. You have the log cabin Republicans being refused a booth at the Texas Republican convention. Their platform specifically calls out the gay community as second-class citizens. But hey, you know what? The check clears, so Dave Rubin's cool with it. I mean, what is the point of life if you have nothing worth standing up for? Yeah, if you have no values, no principles, what's the point? You're just like this empty vessel, right? You're just this empty person, and the money doesn't make you happy. I mean, look, I've never been rich, so I don't really know for sure, but I can tell you that if, let's say, something good happens financially for me, the amount of happiness I feel in response to that versus the amount of happiness I feel when I'm spending time with my friends, when I'm with people who love me, when I feel like I'm doing something because I have a purpose, that is incomparable to any financial success. Obviously everyone needs to be able to survive and take care of themselves and pay their bills. I totally get that, and I'm not diminishing that, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about individuals who would much rather be a puppet for the worst elements of our country than to uphold values, have values, and actually defend and fight for people who don't have any power. That's who Dave Rubin is. It's disgusting.
And listen, I'm not rich, but if I could trade in everything that I have to get my uncle back, who was a gay man that was murdered in a hate crime, beat to death, I would give it all up. I would gladly go live under the freeway just to get my uncle back. I understand now more than ever, because I'm learning just like everybody else, what the trans community is is talking about when they say that they are also oppressed by gay people, by their fellow queer people, gay, men like this who belong to that group, that unit, but will sell them up the road for a check and for position and power. It's just disgusting. And it's so sad to see because like everything else, it's always the people of color, the poor people that always pay the grand price for all of this type of behavior.
Absolutely. Well, related to that, we are now seeing this battle play out in Congress in regard to this lunch program, school lunch program that was expanded during the COVID pandemic. It has expired. It's about to expire, actually. And so Congress is trying to, some members of Congress, expand it until the end of September, but they're getting some backlash from Republicans. So first, let's talk about the context here, okay? So this is a government funding program for school lunches. It's set to expire next week, to be specific. Some senators are working to extend the program, but other senators like Roger Marshall, who's a Republican from Kansas, says that it should expire because the funding won't go to what he refers to as anti-LGBTQ schools. So the way that the legislation is written is to ensure that schools who discriminate against LGBT students in denying them school lunches should not qualify for the federal funds that they would otherwise get through this program. And so Republican senators, of course, have a problem with that. The waivers were left out of the budget, by the way, that President Biden signed in March. The bipartisan group of senators have revealed their legislation. These are the good guys who want to keep this program in place through September. Those senators include Debbie Stabenow, a Democrat, John Boozman, who's a Republican from Arkansas, Representative Bobby Scott, a Democrat from Virginia, and then you have Virginia Fox, who's a Republican from North Carolina. So it is bipartisan in that regard, but keeping the waivers would only cost $3 million. But at the end of the day, the program ends up being budget neutral. Look, we spend so much money on the Defense Department that I don't even want to get into the details about it being budget neutral, like F off, okay? If we can spend literally hundreds of billions of dollars every year and increase the budget for the military every year, we can spend $3 billion on school lunches for kids. Now, Roger Marshall, who's a Republican from Kansas, said in an interview that he is contemplating objecting to the measure because of new guidance from the Agriculture Department banning LGBTQ discrimination in any program that receives federal nutrition money, which includes most school lunch programs. He says, quote, "I'm just afraid that schools in Kansas won't have school lunches because of this administration's radical view on transgender issues. In other words, I'm concerned that the schools in my state discriminate against LGBTQ students. And since I'm concerned about that, I might vote against this legislation." Maybe consider the fact that it's not radical to want to protect kids regardless of what their identity is. But he continues, "And I'm afraid that they're going to raid the school lunch program over that issue." But I want to be clear, a USDA official emphasized that the administration wouldn't pull funding from a school lunch program just because the state has restrictive laws around sports or bathroom access for transgender kids, nor because a school lacks an LGBTQ policy. Rather, individuals could only file complaints if they've been discriminated against by the specific school lunch program based on gender identity. For example, if they were denied food because they identify as transgender.
What kind of monster would deny a child a meal because of their identity, regardless of where you are politically, where you stand? What kind of human being must you be to deny a child a meal? And of course, again, the people who are below the poverty line, the people who are struggling, the people in the marginalized communities are always paying the price for all of these idiots and their foolishness, because they could care less about any of these issues. They just want to win. And you will be the pawn in the game, and you will be the casualty for them wanting to win. Because these people, if you think these people don't have queer children at home, if you think these people are not raising people who are having this identity difference, real life issues, deciding that they are who they are and who they want to be and how they want to express themselves in this world, which they should have the right to. If you think that every single person in Congress has straight children who are non-transgender, non-binary, you are sadly mistaken. This is all about oppressing the people who don't have. Because every single issue, when it comes to abortion, it comes to medical care, all of this stuff, they just don't think you should have it. Because they have the best educations, the best healthcare, and their children, whether they're LGBTQ, non-binary, trans, whatever they are living their best lives, even though they have to deal with these monsters at home.
I mean, what you just said extends to so many issues, including healthcare, by the way. All these lawmakers are like, no, we can't have Medicare for all. We like people having choices. The private health insurance industry, it's great. You've got so many choices, while they're, of course, fully covered by government health care that's offered to members of Congress. I mean, it's the way it works. Lots of resources, lots of great programs that benefit them. They get to take advantage of a two-tier justice system where they can engage in insider trading all they want with no consequences, whereas we would go to prison immediately for that. It's incredible to see it. It plays out day in and day out. And when you have a country that has lost faith in its institutions, these are the issues we need to turn to. When you have people who take an oath of office to represent your best interests, and then they spend their entire political careers working against your best interests, that leads to the erosion in our political discourse, in politics in general, that we're experiencing today. So I think that was a really good point. We have to take a quick break. When we come back, I'll talk about the Biden administration banning nicotine and JUUL items. I'm curious what you guys are gonna think about that story, because I think I disagree with what the administration's doing. I've got that story and more coming right up.
My brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to TYT. Welcome back to our social break. I'm gonna read a bunch of member comments, starting off with Deanne Loso, who says, the Badass Women episode tonight, love it. You know what, that's true. It's been all women and I'm loving it. It's been a good show. Theater Goddess, AKA Verbose Dragon, says, take out the specific context of the election, and it sounds like the Republicans are daring the DOJ to come after them for their part in January 6th. I don't know if they're daring them, but the thing that stands out to me the most is just this sense of, we're above the law, there will not be any consequences. Why don't we try it? What could go wrong, right? Like, there are no deterrents in place right now for people in positions of power to avoid criminality. That is the issue, right? When we talk about the criminal justice system and deterrence, lots of deterrence in place for ordinary people like us, right? Virtually no deterrence for people in power. Go ahead, Ida.
No, I just agree. I just agree with you. I was talking to John about this earlier. Like, there's this anti-intellectual push, right? Like, you intellectual elitists, you guys are smug. Meanwhile, their kids are going to Yale, they're going to Harvard. That, if you look at the schools that they went to, they have post-secondary educations, but they're telling you that you shouldn't be smug and you shouldn't have access to the things that they just take for granted. And it's the same thing with healthcare. You shouldn't want healthcare but we provide their healthcare. Their kids go to school because we provide their schools, these independent schools that cost $25,000 a year, where some kids can't even go to community college, and that's what they're doing for middle school. They have great lunches, but they're telling the average person, and people don't even have the wherewithal to understand that they're working against their own interests by blindly following these clowns in Washington that could care less about their well-being.
Absolutely. Don't shoot, I'm the goalkeeper says, okay, Dave, referring to Dave Rubin, let's make you marry a woman to make you straight, since that's how you think it works, right? Forcing somebody to do something contrary to who they are because you think it'll change them. Such a great point. I Am Sock says Republicans are trying to grab the low-hanging fruit on eliminating trans people by not feeding them. Also, by the way, just the very nature of the rhetoric that they engage in, knowing full well that the suicide rate among the trans community is high. Like, they know what they're doing. I think there's something to what you're arguing here, I Am Sock. Sheena, we're out of time. Sheena says, can somebody explain what exactly Israel does for the citizens of Arkansas? Not much, but there's some campaign funding. Welcome back to TYT. Anna Kasparian and Ida Rodriguez with you. Ida, you are tearing it up. So you come on the show, you always have great thoughts, great opinions, but you have an entirely different career in the comedy world, and you're always doing something interesting. So let us know what you're up to lately.
So, I found out in the last couple of days that HBO Max is doing a 4-year consideration campaign for an Emmy for my special.
Hell yeah.
We're really excited about it because if I get a nomination, I will be the first Latin woman to ever get nominated in that category ever. So, which is sad and great at the same time. And I'll be in Ontario this weekend doing stand-up at the Ontario Improv on what I am calling my joy tour, because I am trying to restore joy for the people who are suffering right now, paying almost $8 for gas, and food is so expensive. And I never forget, how hard it was for me to just survive. And so I just want to go in any way that I can to just provide joy for people, because I know that it's hard, and that's what I'm doing.
You're good people, man. Like, there are a few people in my life who I think about when things are rough and I want to lose faith in humanity in general. You're definitely one of those people. You're just such a good, kind human being, and I'm grateful for you. Grateful for TYT and the people I get to work with.
Thank you. I told you I was emotional, and I looked at the gas station today, and then I saw some people that were sleeping on the street by where I live. And I remember not having a place to live. And I think that as we play all this political theater that's going on, I think about all the parents that are out there having to play Life is Beautiful with their kids because they don't want their children to know the reality of them not having. And just my heart just goes out to people right now. And I wish I could just go out and just help as many people as I can. I would be the worst billionaire on the planet because I wouldn't stay that.
Money's wasted on the rich. It really is. But I feel you 100% on everything you just said. All right, well, let's move on to what the Biden administration is up to when it comes to nicotine.
Yesterday, the FDA announced it's planning to remove virtually all nicotine from cigarettes. Now, nicotine is not the thing that gives you cancer. Nicotine is the thing, it's addictive, but it also increases mental acuity. But they're taking that out. According to the Wall Street Journal, the agency will also ban JUUL e-cigarettes. Now, what happens when you get off nicotine? Well, your testosterone levels plummet and you gain weight, both of which the administration is for because you become more passive and easier to control.
Yes. The Democrats under the leadership of Joe Biden they're conspiring to make Americans who have incredibly high obesity rates obese? What? like Tucker Carlson, he could have had legit constructive criticism in regard to what the Biden administration is doing. In fact, I'm about to engage in that. But of course, he's a clown and has to engage in ridiculous conspiracy theories about why the administration is doing this. Now, to be clear, the Biden administration hopes to eliminate nicotine products in the United States, starting with a ban on JUUL vapes. And I don't agree with that policy. It's not because I think nicotine is good for you. It's not because I want to encourage people to use nicotine or smoke cigarettes with nicotine in them. But it's because I think anytime you just ban a substance, it ends up getting sold on a black market. It's hasn't worked in the past. And the fact that the Biden administration is focusing its energy on this, I think is a little crazy. I think that what we've seen with cigarettes and the campaign to convince people or persuade people not to smoke them has been pretty successful. The policies that were implemented to regulate cigarettes and other tobacco products were actually pretty successful. You'll see the rate of people using these products drop considerably after the government engaged in these campaigns and these policies that really restricted and regulated these products. But to just outright ban the products, I don't think is necessarily gonna work. Now let's talk about the overall nicotine ban that's taking place, okay? So the Biden administration's stance against nicotine was announced earlier this week. The administration is moving forward on a plan to mandate the elimination of nearly all nicotine in cigarettes, a policy that would upend the $95 billion US cigarette industry, and health officials say prompt millions of people to quit smoking. That's what they think. Now, the plan was unveiled this week on Tuesday as part of the administration's agenda of regulatory actions. Likely, it wouldn't take effect for several years. The FDA plans to publish a proposed rule in May of next year, though the agency cautioned that date could change. Then the agency would invite public comments before publishing a final rule. Tobacco companies could then sue, which could further delay the policy's implementation. And I would argue that the corporate interests of the tobacco industry will probably be supported by our Supreme Court justices if it makes its way to the Supreme Court. But Tucker Carlson and his guest had more to say about this move from the Biden administration. Let's watch that and then we'll go to Ida.
They're sending out crack pipes using federal tax dollars. They have opened the borders and of course stimulated the fentanyl crisis that's killed over 100,000 Americans last year. And the Biden administration would like to decriminalize pot. So they've removed the drugs that make you sharper and they're importing the drugs that kill you and make you duller.
And give you schizophrenia. Which marijuana does. I'm sorry, cannabis people, it's true. It's proven true. So it's kind of interesting though. I mean, nicotine is one of the few remaining pleasures for ordinary people, particularly working class men, and now they're taking it away.
Yes.
Do you see a connection there?
Are they like collecting checks from nicotine industries? Like what's the nicotine industry? Like what's going on here?
100%.
What was that? You know what also helps, by the way, with feeling sharp, being focused? Rest helps with that, which a lot of Americans could use, but they're overworked, something that Tucker Carlson has been very supportive of in the past. But anyway, go ahead, Ida.
My mouth was open because I was like, what? First of all, why do they do that to the people who are watching them? That is so insulting. Nobody insults their base more than them. Does Tucker Carlson smoke? Or does he not identify as a working class person? I mean, the misinformation that is given to people who are hanging on by a thread right now is so sad. And it's you can see the classism in it. Why don't we address mental health? Why people are smoking? Because a lot of them have anxiety. Why don't we talk about the fact that it is something that people turn to when they're getting off of addiction of drugs because they need something to help them relax? I'm not here to glorify nicotine, but I'm here to say, why don't we talk about the real root issue of why we have so many people smoking in this country? And I've never heard anybody advocate for nicotine. And the fact that he's just saying that it's for the working class man, I cannot believe that. It makes me sad. It makes me sad to see that they are. It's so abusive. It's abusive what they're doing. It's
amazing to me because it's like, I don't know, man. Tucker Carlson must have a really sad life because he's like, oh, nicotine. It's like one of the few pleasures left in life, and they're gonna take that away from us. It's like, bro, go out, touch grass. Like, what's wrong with you?
No, they're gonna take it away from them, not us.
Yeah. Well, there are some prominent members over at Fox News who absolutely love their nicotine. They particularly love their JUUL vapes, and that would be Sean Hannity. So when news broke last night that the Biden administration would ban JUUL products, Sean Hannity really had a rough go at things. Let's watch.
Sean, they ban it, and I'll do it live on TV, and they can come and arrest me. How's that? All right, Trace Gallagher, unbelievable. Now, especially in light of this. Now, while the Biden FDA wants to stop vaping, many Democratic-run cities and states, they have no problem decriminalizing even hard drugs, even as overdose deaths are spiking.
Okay, so let me also be clear about the fact that the Biden administration is not criminalizing individuals who might have JUUL products or nicotine products. Again, I disagree with what they're doing. I don't think that this is the right approach. Also, what happens to people who use, like, let's say nicotine patches to wean themselves off of cigarettes, right? I get the reasoning for the Biden administration because nicotine is the chemical that makes cigarettes and other tobacco items as addictive as it is. But I don't think this is the right way to go about it. And I think that there are some unanswered questions like the nicotine patch question that I would like some more clarity on. But again, the idea that we're decriminalizing hard drugs while simultaneously criminalizing individuals who are using nicotine is just a lie. That is not happening.
Right. Yeah. But if you think about the list of things we should be addressing right now, I would say that should not be that high on the list. Totally. You think about this administration that is watching the people perish. The people perish, college graduates in debt, they can't survive, gas, food, milk through the roof. And you wanna talk about cigarettes?
I know.
You don't want, you don't want to give Black people reparations, but you want to penalize them for the consequences of being in their communities and the things that happen. It is unbelievable what this administration, disappointing. I knew they were going to be disappointing, but I didn't think that they would be this disappointing this consistently. And it is just unbelievable how these fools at Fox News take this stuff and run with it to continuously scare these people. They open the borders, they got the cigarettes, they're giving you fentanyl, blah, blah, blah. It is such an insult to people. They know, they're like, you know what? These people don't read. These people are not going past middle school. Let's tell them all this stuff. Let's keep them in fear. They're gonna buy our shirts. They're gonna buy our books. They're gonna subscribe to our channel. And we're gonna tell them what they wanna hear. So all the stuff they need to hear for the people that they hate, because we continue to tell them that stuff is being taken away from them. And it's like we have a society of robots walking about the planet, and each group of robots belong to a different leader that is sending them amok. Meanwhile, the people perish. It's just so, God, I don't even know what to say.
Yeah, I look, this, considering what the country's dealing with right now, this shouldn't even be a priority. And I don't know what the administration's doing. But my reasons for critiquing the Biden administration for this are obviously very different from the critiques you're gonna hear from right wingers on Fox News. They peddle fear. They're fear merchants, and they do it day in and day out. It has divided the country in the worst possible ways. It's really sad to see. Well, what's also sad to see is the ongoing racism within police departments. And I want to talk a little bit about one police chief in Ohio who's had some pretty terrible accusations against him with evidence to back it up. A former police chief in Ohio is facing a discrimination lawsuit after he allegedly photoshopped a Latino officer's face onto a bottle of hot sauce, Tapatio to be exact. Now, the police officer, AJ Torres, says that his former boss, then Sheffield Lake Police Chief Anthony Campo, regularly targeted him both for his race and also his religious beliefs before Campo finally retired about a year ago. Now, this has turned into a lawsuit, which is why it's in the news. During a press conference with his attorneys Tuesday, Torres explained that Campo photoshopped his head wearing a sombrero onto a bottle of Tapatio and then posted it on the department's bulletin board, right? I mean, it's bad enough when you hear stories about this with cops like emailing each other terrible things. But no, this police chief is like, I did something terrible and I'm now going to post about it on the bulletin board to further embarrass my subordinate. That's essentially what he did here. And of course, it's incredibly racist. Let's take a quick look at who this former police chief was and what he had done to the bottle of Tapatio, which we've censored. There it is, okay. Just evidence that it happened. When Torres was hired part-time in 2013, the city agreed to give him Sundays off so he could observe the Sabbath and continue his charity work. Campo, though, regularly tried to make him work on Sundays anyway. He also made fun of him for observing Lent and insulted his charity work. I mean, isn't it so funny when people do charity work? Let's bully them for it. Amazing. In addition to the two other incidents, Torres says Campo once photoshopped Torres's head onto the body of a priest with the caption, "You want me to work on Sunday? Oh, hell no." He also accused Torres of being a pedophile, which is a right-wing favorite these days, defaming people as pedophiles, which is like one of the worst things you could possibly do. List goes on and on. Ida, obviously these types of stories at this point, not surprising, but it looks like this police chief ended up retiring before he could get fired.
You know, we wonder sometimes why some policemen of color don't come forward and say anything about what's happening, because they too are experiencing racial discrimination, racism, bigotry within the workplace. And sometimes if they do speak up, you know, there are consequences. But my question is, if you have time to sit your ass down and Photoshop pictures, which takes time, shouldn't you be using that time to protect and serve? Like, why are you doing that on our dollar? We pay your salaries. Like, we have to start holding the people that we pay accountable for what they do with their time on the clock with us. And I just want to know, like, you know, I mean, he photoshopped more than one picture. So obviously if he's doing that, I can't imagine what he's doing to the other people in there. You know what I mean?
Oh, I'll tell you, because there's a lot more. I mean, if you think the Tapatio bottle was bad, it's about to get worse, okay? So according to a letter from the city's attorneys, the city of Sheffield Lake does not dispute Campo's conduct was perhaps inappropriate and in poor taste. No, it was racist, it was bullying, and it was being terrible to someone who reports to him. Yep. But let me continue. However, the city maintains that the former chief's actions were not so offensive to the reasonable person that it would materially affect the terms and consequences of employment. So let me continue. I just want to give you the response from the city, the callous, ridiculous response, before I get to some of the other things that he's done, okay? Because he's done terrible things. So last June, He was forced to resign after he was caught. So my apologies, I thought he retired before he could resign or before he got fired. But no, he was forced to resign after he was caught on video placing a sign with the words Ku Klux Klan on the raincoat of the department's only black officer. The officer, Keith Poole, said that he had a family member killed by the KKK. So I can imagine how awful that feels, how triggering that might be. And there's evidence of it, which you're looking at right now. You see this clown, placing the sign on the back of the raincoat. The charge of discrimination filed by Poole last November said that Campo also made a makeshift KKK hat out of paper and wrote in front of him and his colleagues and insisted that he wear it when responding to his next service call. Campo was also accused of telling officers before Poole's employment that he'd never hire an N-word. Real classy. And the city, by the way, knows about all this. And they're like, it's in poor taste, but does it really rise to the level of discrimination? City protected this guy.
Of course they did, because racism is so American. Racism is so embedded in the fiber of this country. And then constantly telling people of color that they are, gaslighting people of color. Here we go, pulling the race card. Everything is about race. It's like blah, 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 blah. Every single day in America for a person of color is a moment that they have to think about the color of their skin and how other people are going to engage them because of it. And the thought of, having to be in the presence of someone who thinks it's funny to do the KKK thing when you got a family member killed. I mean, that's actually trauma. But the toxic masculinity that runs within law enforcement is also, combined into. You throw the sexism, the racism, the homophobia, you stir it up. It's all connected, and these, and I'm thinking the last name Campo. Like I really want to know what the origin of that last name is. But the fact that you're doing this and people need you, the people need you. It's just so what else is going on in that police department? Like, and then they wonder, you know what I mean? Like why people don't respect them. If that's the head of it, that's the boss. Why would anybody respect that situation? This is who's in charge.
Now, while it was very harsh toward the city and their ridiculous statement, I do want to give some credit to the mayor who spoke about his interaction with Campo after the video of him placing the note on the rain jacket came out. The chief was standing in his office. He made a joke. Am I going to get fired over this? And I looked at the law director and handed him his paper. And he says, after 30 years, this is what I get. I said, you have 10 minutes to get out of your office. That's the way he should have been treated as soon as he started photoshopping officers' faces in a racist way onto bottles of hot sauce. All right, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, we've got more news for you, including a story involving Donald Trump seething during the January 6th hearings. We've got that and more coming right up. Final social break of the day. So I'm going to do a rapid fire round. Brett Campbell writes in and says, would you want to keep a gun if you were married to Ginny Thomas? The thought of having Ginny Thomas in the same space, like living situation, is pretty terrible. Anyway. Nick Clark writes, I'm just gonna stop before I say something that could get me in trouble. Nick Clark says, this new ruling is going to make the cops' job much more dangerous and give them the reason needed for excessive force and stop and frisk policies. Well, I mean, you can't really do stop and frisk if you're stopping and frisking for guns in New York, right? I mean, that was part of the reason why they were doing it. And now if you have, I'm guessing, the license or the permit to carry, you can carry based on what the Supreme Court decided. Phil Jones says, this is like Back to the Future 2 when Biff changed Hill Valley by giving the almanac to his past self. I didn't watch Back to the Future 2, so I didn't get that at all. Did you get it, Ida?
No, I didn't watch it either.
All right, Pitchforks Dragon says, TYT is awesome. You guys are doing a great job. I just wish there was a show that wasn't 9 to 5 Pacific time. People on the West Coast could watch after work. I hear you. I do not make programming decisions, but you are very persistent. So I'll keep reading your super chats and maybe management will hear it. Gabby Mathis says, our rainbow flag is in our window, living in an HOA situation. Thoughts and prayers. And one time a year, I give a pansexual flag to my gay neighbors. R. King 1 Garcia says, Amy Carter went to public school, only Prez kids. Mr. QTube, first name Fa, says, as an ex-smoker who vapes, not JUUL, I think the government regulations regarding vaping, nicotine, and nicotine are seriously misguided. I agree with you on that. And more from the same person, for info on vaping and nicotine, check out CASAA. All right, everyone, check that out. We still have a little bit of time, which is great. In our Twitch community, we have Cody, the epilepsy dragon, saying, I love that picture behind Ida. Dave Schmidt gifted 2 subs. Thank you so much for that. And Mary Animal says, why would you deny a kid food for any reason? I totally agree with you on that. I mean, it's pretty incredible how brazenly cruel some of these lawmakers are. They have no shame, they don't care. It's all about political power for them, and political power means finding a boogeyman, right? A boogeyman, like whether it's the gay community, the transgender community, people of color, Muslims, that's how they accumulate power among right-wing voters. All right, in our member comments, we have Idiocracy Genius. What next? Pledge allegiance to a terrorist organization if I'm getting government benefits or before I get my driver's license. So that's a comment about the story we did on the BDS movement. All right, we got to get back to the show. See you there. Welcome back to the show. Anna Kasparian, Ida Rodriguez with you. And we've got a doozy of a story. I always like to lighten things up in the last segment. And what better than dunking on Donald Trump as he seethes over the January 6th hearings? So what are the details? Is Trump watching the hearings? Well, it turns out Donald Trump, no stranger to television, loves watching TV. Apparently has his eyes glued to the television as the January 6th hearings are taking place. These are the hearings involving the House Select Committee investigating the Capitol riots that took place on January 6th. And here's what we know based on, to be fair, unnamed sources who are close to the president. They've spoken to the press, and apparently Trump is hate watching the January 6th committee hearings, incensed because he believes nobody's defending him. Trump is at the point of about to scream at the TV as he tunes in to each hearing. And in fact, he's reportedly ranting to anyone around him that will listen. A person familiar though with this situation denied this, saying this is not true. He has barely watched any of the hearings at all. Okay. I don't know if I buy that. I definitely am leaning in the direction of believing the other sources who say he is watching the hearings and he's really upset about no one defending him. But I mean, Ida, it's kind of hard to find people who are willing to defend you when you're on the record countless times inciting violence, lying about the outcome of the presidential election, spreading conspiracies about widespread voter fraud in which he had no evidence of and lost over 60 court battles on. Like, who's gonna defend you? You lied. It's very clear.
He's always been lying. He's been lying, I mean, Donald Trump inserted himself in the 5 young men in the Central Park 5, the young men. He inserted himself into that conversation. And he has a history of just going around saying things that are not rooted in truth, that are always stoking fear, that promote his elitist ways. The people who support him, that continue to support him blindly, are people that he wouldn't spit on if they were on fire. If you see who he kicks it with celebrities, rich people, who have money and power. That's who he hangs out with. And of course he lies. He's allegedly committed adultery. He lied to his wife. I mean, he's lied to America over and over again on record. We could do side by side with all the lies that he told during his presidency. It just doesn't matter anymore. He feels like it doesn't matter what he does because the people who are gonna follow him are gonna blindly follow him so long as they stay over there. Because if you ever notice Donald Trump taking pictures with regular citizens, like those people who blindly follow him, pull up the pictures. Show me pictures of Donald Trump. And if you see him, it's very few and far in between of him actually interacting with the people. Like, he doesn't, he's an elitist and he's a liar, and he is just doing whatever and that he can do to maintain power, because to him it's fun. It's a little game. It's a little game and another way to make money. It ain't about this country and making the country great. It's about continuous. He found another hustle. And he's not a good businessman. Everything he does is a hustle, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And what's really interesting though, is that he's furious that there aren't like Matt Gaetz type people serving on. If they ended up serving on the committee, he'd be very upset. Like if it was announced prior to the investigation and the hearings taking place that, hey, this is the bipartisan select committee, and they included people like Matt Gaetz or Marjorie Greene, he would be upset that they were taking part in the investigation. And that is exactly why the Republican leadership in the House, Kevin McCarthy, prevented them from doing it. Ask them not to do it. So right now, you can't win with Trump. That's what I love. That's my favorite thing about Trump, right? Because you have all these yes men like circling, yes, sir, yes, we will do whatever you want, sir. And then eventually, inevitably, either they're going to fail to carry out something extreme that Trump is demanding, or they're gonna carry out exactly what Trump is demanding, and they're still gonna lose with this guy. Because there's no winning with these entitled, spoiled, criminal-minded losers. That's who Donald Trump is. That is who he is in his heart. It's who he has been since the day he was born, okay? And it's been reinforced over and over again through his lifetime of actions. So let's talk about this. Trump is angry at House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy for pulling pro-Trump Republicans from sitting in that committee. Former President Trump has said privately for months that Kevin McCarthy's decision to pull pro-Trump Republicans from sitting on the committee was a mistake, one that has become clearer as Trump watches the hearings that are working to build the case that he should be criminally charged for conspiring to overturn the 2020 presidential election. And Trump's advisors are apparently triggered by the fact that they're no longer in power and can't manipulate this whole process. Several Trump advisors said that they were particularly frustrated. They had no insight into the committee's discussions, plans, and divisions so they could better prepare for what was coming. The criminals are really mad that they can't be part of the criminal investigation. They're so upset.
Because that's the process in America. Remember, the police investigate the police to see if the police is doing something wrong. I think it was George Bernard Shaw that said, a tyranny is a family ruled by its sickest member. And I think that when you think about that little crew of the little sycophants that roll with Donald Trump, who are constantly walking on eggshells because of the terror that he rains down on them, that's what happens. That's what happens when you get in bed, when you do a deal with the devil. There's no winning. There's no winning because the devil's objective is to get you, not for you to win, dummy.
Exactly. And also, I mean, look, it's worth noting what McCarthy's reasoning was. Like, why was it that he discouraged Republican members of Congress from being part of this investigation and the select committee? Well, he believed that having Republicans play a role would legitimize the process, and he wants to say, look, this is just political, right? This is just Democrats engaging in a witch hunt. But it's really, really hard to make that case when you have not just one Republican member of Congress, Liz Cheney, serving in this investigation. And of course, Cheney is actually against Trump, one of the few Republicans who's very outspoken against Trump. You have Trump administration officials, people appointed by Trump, testifying against him during the hearings. Today, you had 3 high-level DOJ officials testify against Trump. All 3 of them, by the way, were appointed by Trump. And so, yeah, it's gonna be really hard for Kevin McCarthy or any Republican who sides with this madman to argue that this is like an illegitimate political process and nothing more. No, it's incredibly compelling. It's very well done, and the evidence is there. They came with the receipts.
It's fun to watch, right? Because it's the chickens coming home to roost, as you said earlier. Like, even the people that he appointed, that he thought would be blindly, committed to him and what he says. Everybody has their breaking point, and everybody has their deal breakers, and it's just fun to watch. And as they try to say that this is not valid, they are saying that it is. That's part of your they. They're saying it is valid.
Yeah, we'll see what comes of it. I look, if all we're gonna get from Trump for now, at least, is knowing that he's freaking out about it, at least that gives us some temporary relief. Because I think criminals like him, people who wanna undermine our electoral process, should absolutely suffer consequences. And if it keeps them up at night, that's really nice in the short term. I'm really enjoying that in the short term. But we'll see how it plays out in the future. But I wanna drive home this point again. It's not just about this particular incident and Trump administration officials. It's also about how it is that we got to a place in America where a huge portion of the country is ready and willing to believe conspiratorial BS, complete lies about our electoral process with absolutely no evidence to back it up. How did we get here? And I think it has a lot to do with the lack of trust in our institutions. People don't trust the press. People don't trust politicians. They don't trust the establishment, whether it's the right-wing establishment or the Democratic establishment. That's a big problem. And I think that this is a moment that should be reflective. Like, people should reflect on what they're doing wrong to get to a place in America where a huge portion of the country is willing to believe like the most insane lies imaginable.
It's time to, get back to basic education. Readers are leaders, encouraging people to seek information for themselves. The lack of education is at the root of a lot of these issues. And I just hope that we start valuing that more, because that is actually the true ticket to freedom.
Absolutely. Well, we've got a few more minutes. I'm gonna read some comments from our members before we wrap up the show and go to our bonus episode. Mickey C, the Silver Hair Dragon, says, the SC are also allowing cops to not use Miranda when they arrest someone, Supreme Court, by the way. Giving the cops more power to abuse is what's needed now. That was sarcastic with a rolling eye emoji. They're accelerating their removal of people's rights. Exactly. I mean, No, the Supreme Court situation is disastrous. But to that point, Cypherbox says, have we forgotten that we can increase the number of Supreme Court justices? There is no law against it. The Constitution does not include a number of justices. If we plan on preventing the overturning of Roe v. Wade, reestablishing this New York gun law and the anti-BDS law, add more judges. Yeah, I agree with you on that. But the Biden administration has been committed to doing nothing. He did not want to pack the courts. He refuses to pack the courts, which makes anything that Congress does on our behalf that could actually be beneficial at risk, right? I mean, if somehow miraculously Congress passes Medicare for all, that'll be challenged by the private healthcare industry. That'll be challenged by the corporations who benefit from this broken healthcare system. They'll challenge it all the way to the Supreme Court. And these pro-corporate right-wing Supreme Court justices will very well reverse those laws. And it's terrifying. There are real consequences to what we're seeing now in the Supreme Court. All right, bonus episode is next. You're gonna love it, don't miss it, and we'll see you there.
Hey everyone, Matteo Scarapore here, author of Black Buck, which is Shop TYT's first fiction book ever. I'm honored.